Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussion. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and engaging conversation as it happens. I am pleased to be in the company of Alison Bell, the Chancellor of WGU Indiana. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
So normally when I sort of think about having these conversations, I really frame it, as you know, it's just like we're having dinner without food.
Sure.
So we don't have to worry about talking with our mouths full. And I don't usually have any objective or intent. But because we're looking at and talking about higher education, I do want to make sure that we're going to have both a philosophical and pragmatic conversation about higher education and sort of the role and place that WGU and WGU Indiana plays.
Sure.
So let's start with just giving a bit of an understanding of what is WGU and WGU Indiana, which is now in its 11th year,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So go ahead and give me some background and understanding.
Sure. So WGU is an national online not-for-profit university. It's fully accredited. It's been around since the late 90s as a national university, created it's a competency-based education. So by that I mean we measure what you know, you demonstrate competency, you earn your credit for that.
And it's completely online.
It's completely online. The exception to that is we do have a nursing program and a teaching program. So the clinicals for nursing, yeah, you do that in person.
Right.
Thank goodness, right?
Right.
And teaching, we have demonstration teaching or student teaching that happens in the classroom. But other than that, everything's entirely online. You know, science labs are sent to the lab kit is sent to the student at home. They do that and they submit their work online. So it's all online and has been, which if you think about it, is pretty revolutionary. This was created literally in the mid to late 90s. I can remember in 1995, I was graduating from grad school, so now you know how old I am.
When I was,
so, and I can remember learning about web browsers at that time and being like, what? I couldn't even kind of put my head around it. At this same time, this group of governors was creating this model for online education.
Okay, so let's talk about why these group of governors thought that there was a need to create this new form of education.
Okay, so they saw there's a lot of lore around it, and I've actually heard the actual governors tell the story, but it was a couple different things. So this was a group of Western governors. WGU is Western Governors University. It was a group of governors out west. Little known fact, they're actually on that same Western Governors Council was the Indiana governor at the time, which is funny, but because we're not a Western state, right? Guess we used to be.
Well, we're sort of like supposed to be in the middle of the,
Sort of. It's weird. It depends on how you define middle. But at any rate, they out in those Western states, if you think about them, they're big and sprawling. They're not necessarily real populated, but they had a need to be able to educate, particularly teachers. But they recognize the inability for a lot of potential students to get to a physical campus. So they were like, why not? Let's do this kind of distance education model and do it online. And then tandem to that, the story goes, one of the governors, they were sitting next to each other on a graduation stage. And as the graduates walked across, one of them leaned over to the other and said, this was for a different university, said, how do we know that diploma that person's getting truly tells us what they know? Like, how do we feel confident about that? And just started to question the model of education because we all know it. I know that I was given an A grade in classes where I probably didn't totally earn that grade, right? And so it was that questioning.
Okay, but there is partly, how do we know what they learned, right?
Yeah.
Or partly is the reputation from the institution from which you get that degree, right?
Sure, but you can't tell me, I don't care how, like Harvard, I guarantee you there are people that have graduated from Harvard who got an A that probably...
Well, Harvard, the philosophy of Harvard is it's hard to get into, it's not hard to stay.
Sure, but you know what I mean?
But then we have the issue though with, if we look at where you're saying, okay, how do we measure one degree over the other? That was the point of why for getting into college, the SAT was created, because you couldn't assess what one high school diploma was versus another one, and then that created all kinds of problems, right?
Yeah.
So do you think that then we need to have, was this the idea, we needed to have more licensure tests like we have for certain careers, or?
Not licensure necessarily. I mean, I guess that could be a part of it, but really that's where the competency concept
and competency, and to explain what is the competency-based learning
So
model.
competency-based learning is that we measure what you know, irrespective of time spent in the seat in the classroom or anything else. And so, so truly, in our model, our degree programs are, I guess you could like deconstruct them down into competencies. Those competencies are connected to the field in which that degree is. So, so if you're getting a degree in accounting, for example, then an accounting degree is deconstructed down by, well, what competencies does someone who has graduated with accounting is assumed to have by someone who if I want to hire an accountant, what are the competencies that they should have? It's quite complex, right? But and that includes the competencies that would be incorporated into general education concepts like writing, like cultural understanding, and et cetera. So all of our degree programs are broken down into competencies, which you can think of them as like groupings of specialized skills. The concept of a competency-based education came from that same group of governors questioning, like, what does this degree tell us, regardless of institution? What does it tell us about this person's preparedness to do life? And level of expertise or knowledge or competency in whatever field they're going into. And so they drew from pilot school. So, like, we want people who fly our planes to be competent in flying, right? So they have to demonstrate competency.
But they also have to have a certain number of hours as well. So it's not.
Yeah, well, so that part of it we didn't take, right? But I mean, like that, I think for whatever reason, the people, I don't know anything about flying planes, right? But time on task is a part of demonstrating competency for that particular skill. That makes sense for that skill. But time on task doesn't make sense for someone who's
like a writer.
So, or although you could argue you get better,
deadline,
right? But at any rate, so that's the concept of competency. So, so it was twofold. It was creating access to people who couldn't get to in-person learning, and then also creating a way to measure learning that was different than what existed, that where we could feel more confident that this person truly knows what their degree says that they know.
And do you think, though, because WGU focuses really in 4 areas, right? So that's business, teacher education K through 12, information technology, and healthcare.
That's right.
So do you think that having a competency-based learning system works better for certain fields of study than others, or do you think that you could apply, because how would you measure if somebody graduated in English literature? You can't necessarily say what is it that they should be able to do, or could you, do you think?
Yes, I think you can measure competency in anything. I think competency makes a whole lot more sense than a letter A grade. What does that mean?
Well, and the thing is after like your second year out, nobody wants to know what your GPA is anyway.
Because everybody knows it means nothing to me. That's maybe controversial, but it's truly the way I feel. Like we take it, like when I think about my children's grades, like if they get an A, I figure they're doing okay. But I don't get real uptight about letter grades. I'm like, did you do your best? Did you learn something? You know.
So you think that this is really a more pragmatic way to measure when people say, "Oh, I learned something," to measure what it is that they actually learned, or because most people, take away in a 30-minute class, they really only absorb about 3 minutes of information. So did they then get educators and people together to sort of say, okay, how do we, because they also were doing this, right, to ensure that we had a better workforce, and also we were preparing a workforce for the future at the time, right?
Yes, so our degree programs are workforce related. We make no bones about it. We're not saying that's the only way education should be, but that's the gap we are filling. That's
and
our intent.
And also and the gap you're filling is for the type of student, right?
Yes.
And those students mostly are, because 70% of your students are low income, right?
Yes. From one of underserved is the way. So it could be low income. There are other ways that that we might define underserved. But in general, our mission, it's real easy. It is changing lives for the better by creating pathways to opportunity. So it's so important that anybody have the same access to opportunities that education creates. And we want to be a part of that solution. That's who we are. So
and a big part of that is also cost.
Yes.
So talk about cost, and then we'll go into why WGU Indiana was created.
Okay. So cost, our degree programs right now they average between $6,000 and $7,000 a year.
And you have a BA programs and master's programs in those 4 areas.
In those 4 areas, 66 or more, 66 and counting. Different academic programs, bachelor's and master's in those 4 colleges. So depending on the program, it's between $6,000 and $7,000 per year. But the affordability story is more complicated than that. So that alone is great. That's a great price, right?
And that's a flat rate.
That's a flat rate. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that when there's a certification required by your professional,
like healthcare, nursing,
IT,
teaching,
even more,
IT.
Any professional certifications that are required, the cost of that are rolled into your tuition. So when you graduate, it's not like, okay, I've got my degree, but now I have to pay for X, Y, and Z certifications. You graduate, you have everything you need to be employable, and it was no hidden cost. We don't have any hidden fees, anything. All of the learning resources that you need, like textbooks, they're all a part of your tuition.
And you said like the lab kits, all of that.
Everything. There's nothing that's tagged on top.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay.
And so I think that's really important. And our costs are transparent. I've worked for other universities where you can't find anywhere exactly how much it's going to cost you to go.
Well, it's the same like hospitals. One hospital charges this, another you don't know. Right?
Well, right, and you can go on the website and try and find a straightforward, how much is this going to cost me? It's hard. I know I'm a parent of a college student, but
and also because then there's the room and board, and there's all the student fees, and there's
at WGU, you go to the website, it tells you exactly what it is, it breaks it down, you know what you're paying. So there's that. So the other piece of the affordability it relates to what you said, the flat rate. So we're not on a semester system. You can start any month. So and when you start, that starts your clock for your first term. A term is 6 months, which is almost twice as long as a typical semester. And you, while they're all full-time programs as of right now, so you have to complete the minimum. It's equivalent of 12 credit hours in a traditional.
So it's like you're going to school full-time, but the majority of your students are also working part-time or full-time, right?
80% or more work part-time or full-time, and that there's a reason for that because the flexibility of our program. So they can complete full-time coursework, but because we're totally flexible, totally online, you don't have a class time where you log in and meet with your professor. All of your learning resources are asynchronous.
And then do you take it like, so is it sort of like a sequential, or do you take multiple classes at one time, or
you can do either?
Okay.
You can do either. It's totally learner-led. So every student has a program mentor who's trained in the, like if you're in a business program, your program mentor has at least a master's degree and experience in the field of business. And a program
mentor is different than the instructors or
program mentor.
Yeah.
I like to describe them like a hybrid between a life success coach and an academic advisor. So they know your academic program, they understand the courses, but they also know how to help people be successful and goal setting. So they're an accountability partner with the student, and they help them work out how they want to plan their term, that 6-month term. So everybody starts off, if you're an undergrad, with the assumption that you're going to complete the equivalent of 12 credit hours. I speak in those terms because that's what people understand. But in our world,
that's pretty much a standard semester's worth of work. Taking 12, 4 classes.
It's 4-ish. Sometimes it'll be less than that because some of our courses have more time. So some people, more people do them sequentially. Like, I'm going to start with this course, I'm going to finish it, and I'm going to move on to this one. And they've planned out that term. But if it suits your learning style better to be like, I need to spend a little time here and a little time here, I think the program mentor would help plan and use experience to say, you know what, this course is one that you probably don't want to work on while you're working on everything else. They'll help them make those informed decisions. So you can do it either way. Once you complete that minimum 12 competency units when you're an undergrad, you can add in additional courses in that 6 months. And so then you get this kind of all-you-can-eat model. So, let's say your tuition for that term is $3,500. You could complete 12 credits, or you could complete 50 or more.
So realistically, that would mean, so if I do all the required 12 credits in 3 months, then I have the next 3 months where I can then take the next, sort of bring on the next courses. So ultimately, that will take me less time and less money to complete the degree.
Yes.
So you could really potentially complete your degree in like 2.5 years versus, so the length it would take you maybe to get an associate's degree, if you do it diligently, you could get your bachelor's degree.
And we have people do it all the time. It's not easy. There's a great deal of academic rigor, and sometimes people make the assumption that online is easier. It's not. It's actually more challenging in some ways, but we make it possible because of the flexibility and personalization of the degree program. So if you're a nurse, for example, and you're working 3 days on, 3 days off, 12-hour shifts, you couldn't go to a traditional campus, but with us, you can. On those 3 days that you're off, you can, work, plan, and get your coursework done, and then those 3 days that you're working, you don't do any coursework. You don't worry about it.
Right.
Or the reason our mascot is Sage the Night Owl is because we know from student activity on the portal that most of our students do their coursework at night.
Right, because especially if they have children, then they do it after they
caregiving, they're working. Yeah, it's the only way they can do it.
So because they are accredited, they're accredited university, then for WGU, you are eligible for federal student aid
So
financing.
that goes to the...
So now, so let's talk about, because if the governor of Indiana was originally on WGU, so technically then Indiana residents would be allowed to participate. Why was WGU created, Indiana created 11 years ago?
So that's a great question, and it wasn't just that Indiana folks could go. It's a national university.
So anyone can go from any state? Okay.
So at the time, it was Governor Mitch Daniels, and he was on that board, on the advisory board, and at the time, there were about 200 Hoosiers enrolled in the National Western Governors University, and he also saw that there are 750,000 adults in Indiana with some college but no degree, and he saw the potential there, that WGU was a solution. So it was twofold. Launching WGU Indiana was the first state affiliate in 2010, and his motivation behind that was branding, was awareness. Let's launch it. Let's call it the 8th state university, though there's no state funding. We're privately funded.
Okay.
So I think that's an important thing to understand. So it was branding in WGU Indiana, but then the other piece of that was that we got approved in the state legislature to offer students both state and with their federal financial aid.
So you're really a private nonprofit institution of higher education, just like any regular, most colleges and universities.
That's right.
So how do you get your funding? I mean, because
Tuition.
But if your tuition is so much lower, right, then how are you able to pay to have top-notch professors and...
That's our only expense. Not to pick on any of our state universities, but think about Indiana University's campus. Think about the facility costs. We have nothing like that. We have 3 offices, around the whole United States.
Right.
That's a lot different than the campus facilities. Our only expense is our incredibly high quality, people talent, and our technology, which is a fair.
So are
expense.
you able to attract and retain comparable professors that I would get? We're going to use IU.
That's a part of our accreditation. We couldn't be accredited if we didn't have competent and equally trained professional, faculty.
And so, okay, so let's look at. You talk about this, how you're sort of breaking the mold of, so the key with WGU Indiana, let me just make sure, so is that it's still part of WGU. You get all the classes, everything's
the
it's
same.
really it was more about branding, identity, and also for finance, so that you could really even get more financial aid.
Yeah,
Okay.
It made it more affordable. We do, by the way, you asked about funding. I think it's important. We do have we do get grants, and we do get funding that way too, but we're primarily just...
So that's from the nonprofit world, but but it's tuition driven. So let's talk about how you talk about this breaking the mold of a traditional higher education model, and sort of like this, we were talking about, the sage on a stage. So talk about how you're shifting and changing that.
Well, so couple of different things, and you can kind of stop me and redirect, but specifically the sage on the stage is, you know, my experience in higher ed was to go to a lecture and have someone stand up there and share great information with me, and some instructors did it in a really dynamic way, but truly they were the person who was they were the expert. They created, in most cases, the curriculum that they then taught, and then they graded my work.
Or the TA.
Or the TA, let's be real. So,
but that's also only we have to remember, that's only in universities and colleges where they say that your classes will be taught by professors. At a lot of colleges and universities, they are not taught by professors. You actually are getting graduate students.
They'll still say.
They'll still say, but so let's just make that clear too,
right.
so that all your classes are also taught by professors.
It's either, yes, exactly. And so one of the ways that we're different is that we've disaggregated the faculty model. So we have a huge team of experts who create the curriculum.
Okay.
They create the curriculum in consultation with with professional and academic experts, right? So to make sure that our degree programs are aligned with the expectations of that field.
And that's also so that you can structure it so it can be competency based.
Yes.
Because probably the way that you have to teach certain things, because you first have to break it down and say, okay, if someone takes Introduction to Accounting, what are the competencies at the end of that class? It's not just having a basic understanding, like, you know, most people take, it's a basic understanding of accounting.
Yeah,
and
what
you
do
take
they
the
need to
exam,
know?
and so the way that you have to create the courses has to be different, because the way that you're measuring what the understanding of that material is that?
Yes, yes, but the truth of the matter is that any traditional institution of higher ed could break their courses down into competencies, and they typically do. They're typically learning goals at the, you know.
Well, but a lot of times that's determined by the
call it that
professor, though. It's determined by the professor when he creates the syllabus, and he says he's sort of the expert and will use 20th century American literature. So he's an expert, he has a PhD, and so he sort of decides, you know, this is the books we're going to read, this is the topics we're going to discuss, and then he sort of assigns the papers and what have you based on what he feels you should be able to get and understand from that course.
It's true. It should be that there's some standards, right?
Right.
And I think you would find that, because that's how, you know, courses are transferable into our degree program, and our degree programs have transferability into others. We have articulation agreements.
And do you make it easier because a lot of your students have had some college? You know, sometimes they'll tell you, oh, we'll accept your credits from somewhere else, and then you start going, and they're like, nope, we don't have it.
Well, that's what's nice about our model, is that we do accept transfer credit, but if something doesn't come in as a transfer credit and you truly have the competency and you can demonstrate it, you don't have to wait. You don't have to enroll in that class and wait till you can take the final at the end of the semester. You can demonstrate your competency immediately. So if you're like, well, I took that intro to writing class, why isn't it accepted? If you're competent in writing, you demonstrate that and you move on, and you don't pay extra for it. That's just a class that you check off like
so
that.
It's sort of like you test out.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, for example, we had we worked with one of our alums. He's exceptional, but in how quickly he completed the degree program. So I probably won't even talk about the time frame. But he worked for years. He was an entrepreneur, had worked for years in business in the IT world.
Okay.
But he never earned his degree. In fact, had no transfer credit, because he had never taken a course. Or actually, I think what it was is he went to school in the UK, and he just didn't even try to transfer those credits.
Okay.
And so he had done his research, and when the pandemic hit last March, he was like, okay, this is my chance. I'm going home, I have more flexibility. I'm gonna earn my degree.
Mm-hmm. And why did he think at that point, if he achieved success in his business, what was his reasoning? Because a lot of times people that come to you, it's because, as you've seen, that if someone completes their bachelor's degree, in a year or two, they see a $12,000 bump. And for master's, I think it's $18,000 in 4 years.
Yeah, it's a real investment.
But if someone's more accomplished, why would he want to pursue?
Well, I mean, it's a personal thing, but I see this all the time. It's about pride. It's about, I'm in the room with a bunch of executives who at least have their bachelor's and maybe have their master's, and they ask me where I went to school, and I don't have my degree. So that's what he voiced to us. That was his motivation.
And he still felt that there was a difference and a value to getting that degree.
Yeah, it was personal, but that's true for a lot of folks. More of our students are completing their degree because it will create an opportunity for them that they don't have otherwise. But for this particular individual, he was successful, probably would have been fine. However, I will say, and I've worked with people in the past, I used to be a career coach in a former life. I worked with high-level executives who in the 2009 economic downturn lost their jobs. Folks were C-suite at the time making six figures and they had worked for this organization from the time that they graduated from high school.
And they didn't have a degree.
They didn't have a degree.
But when they tried to get another job, they couldn't.
They couldn't get the same level.
Well, and also I was figuring, like when I was looking at this and looking at researching, and I was thinking, well, I got my master's degree 30 years ago. So, and I sort of feel like there are certain skills and expectations for being a journalist today. It's not the skills of storytelling and reporting, but more the technical and data and maybe more how to do some certain extrapolations and stuff that I feel like they should have like refreshers, like where you can go back and not maybe professional development or continuing education, but really specifically for your industry, you know. And you've started some certificate programs.
We're working on that. Yeah, we've launched a few. More of them will come down the line. It's not something that's coming in the next year, but we're working. We see the need for that.
Well, and also because I was thinking about it, like if you think about it, that babies born today, well, hopefully, we're supposed to project it to live beyond 100. So, but people are living longer, and if you retire even at 60 or 65, think about how vibrant and then so people then could have another career.
Sure.
Which is like a lot of times, like I was telling you before, that's when people may consider wanting to be a teacher. But our schools don't make it easy because they say you have to have a master's degree. You have to get a degree in education, even though you might have a master's in a field of study.
Right.
So so that would be a perfect example of like a master's program that I was thinking, I would want to do that online because then I could do that and then I could get my license pretty quickly and be able to then
We do have a transition to teaching degree, by the way.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. I didn't see that one.
Yeah,
but I mean, so you there is opportunity also because I know that one of the big things for WGU in general is that you do a lot of, like, you have the WGU labs and you are evaluating and constantly looking for new classes. And I really was interested in this idea of the micro kind of classes and then the stacking. So explain how you so it's not just that you are creating curriculum in the industries or careers that you view as the ones that are very viable for today and in the future, but it's also how people can maximize and utilize their education experiences. So explain how that works with those.
So exactly what you said about that you completed your master's degree a while ago, and that there are certain skills that might benefit you right now that just weren't relevant when you graduated. And so the need for that is what we would like to address with micro credentials and certifications. And we're not the only institution interested in that. It's something that state governments and workforce development.
But you have the model and the ability and the infrastructure, and for some of them they would have to pivot to this competency based and licensure.
Right. It's not as big of a pivot for us in terms of our educational model.
Right.
So anyway, so that's our intent down the line is to launch more of those. We have a few. Our College of IT launched an IT skills certificate, and it's a 3-course certificate that gives. This is really more targeted toward the high school aged learner, which is a newer space for us. But the intent behind it is to give people who are new to IT, whether they be right out of high school or an adult transitioning, give them an opportunity to experience the different areas of IT so that they understand what web development is
Right,
versus
coding and- yeah, right.
and they can figure out what
Right.
because they're all very different, what
Right.
direction is best for them, but it also gives foundational IT skills
Right.
and a certificate
Right.
that someone who completes that could actually be employable immediately, but it stacks into, and this is the thing, we won't launch any certificates that aren't stackable into a degree program.
So the meaning that you can take them and then you immediately can use them. You also created one for medical coding.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
which
It's
is-
not available in all states yet, but it will be eventually.
And you're also the vice president of regional. So you also oversee not just WGU Indiana, but it's Kentucky,
Michigan, Kentucky and Michigan. We have WGU Ohio
So,
also, which is a
right.
part of, and then we have Western Virginia, and then we have this little tiny sliver of Pennsylvania that's kind of that
Western.
east of the line from up and down
Right.
by Erie and Pittsburgh.
And also because the important thing about WGU Ohio was WGU Indiana was the first one, and now there are 7. So it was probably you were sort of the proof of concept and then worked it out and then were able to roll it out. So
Yes.
that would make sense that in your region, Ohio. But all the courses you take anywhere is all the
It's
same.
all the same. It's all standardized. Yeah.
So you're slowly rolling out the this idea of the certification programs.
And ultimately what I anticipate and the plan is that degree programs will be stackable. I mean, ultimately what I expect is, and I think this is going to be true in other institutions, is that that degrees will be defined into clusters of learning and clusters of skills so that people, because life happens, when they need to stop out, rather than stopping right now, so many people stop and they kind of don't have anything to show for it.
Right.
But we know that they learned something. We know
Right.
that they gained some
Right.
skills.
Right.
So if degrees were stackable
Right. Well,
and
they-
had stop out points, you could stop out after a year and be like, okay, I don't have my bachelor's degree,
Right.
but I do have my
But that's what they do. But that's what they do with professional advancement kinds of programming, or if you take it like an executive, like I have an executive MBA.
Yes.
So, but because I didn't
Just
need
doing it
another
at a
degree,
lower level.
right? So, but when you do like a professional development kind of, you get if you take a certain, you get a certificate.
and it's recognized
Nice,
and
right,
it's standardized. We're just
Right.
taking that concept and applying it to degree programs.
Okay, but one of the things I thought was very interesting is this idea that what people don't realize is the overall enrollment in higher education is declining. And it's like been by over 1 million students since 2011. Why?
Well, I think it's complicated. One, a real basic thing is that most traditional higher ed focuses on 18 to 22-year-olds.
Okay,
That population is shrinking.
right.
And we talked a lot, I used to work in traditional higher ed, we talked a lot about the cliff. There's this cliff coming where all of a sudden,
Right.
like, childbirth levels
Well, there was the
dropped off.
cliff after the baby boomers. So, like our generation,
more of a
we
cliff.
were we were that smallest, and then they started the Generation Y, and then you've got the millennials and
another
stuff. But
cliff.
now we're going to have another cliff because it's just like the baby boomers. There were 76 million, and there were 72 million millennials. Well, then the next generation, because it's really based on every
How
other
many
parents,
parents.
because the parents, right?
Yeah, so we've got the cliff coming. So that's one reason. But there are a lot of other reasons. I think, affordability, when I think about, my parents and I have talked about this, I'm putting my oldest daughter through college now, and my parents have talked about, they put all 4 of their children through college. They were like, it was a very different world in terms of what it costs.
Okay, but I also will argue that when I went to college, my freshman year was the first time that a college cost of college was $30,000 a year. And at that time, everybody said, "Oh, that's exorbitant, so expensive." And granted that the cost of higher education is exceeded 4 times as fast as the rate of inflation, and it doesn't keep up with household income. But that's always been an issue. I mean, that's not new. The cost of education. I think where the issue is not necessarily the cost of the education, but then also with the student loan interest rates.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue with you that
Okay.
the cost is that it has increased exponentially compared. It's not.
So you
as-
don't think that it's just increased incrementally in an appropriate way to
No,
say
I
that
don't.
it's always been expensive?
No, it has always been a sort of an elite,
Right.
Elite access to
Okay.
it for sure.
Okay.
But also, the other change is that, like, like when my parents graduated from college, you could still get you could earn a living wage pretty easily with or without a college degree.
Right.
Anymore, that isn't necessarily
No, I say that
true.
you really, in a lot of cases, you can't get by with just a bachelor's degree.
So even if the cost of a degree increased at the exact same rate as cost of living and everything else, there's still a different, the lack of access to it is more critically important now than it would have been in the 70s.
So this is my philosophical question for you, which I was thinking about, because so you talk about that you're taking away the issues of time, and you also are addressing the accessibility through cost, and then you're also reaching, minority-based, first generation, low income, rural. Okay. So, but are we also, in a way, what I was thinking about is, are we saying that different groups of people need different types of degrees? Because what I was thinking is, are we really making the idea of a true liberal arts degree where you are not coming out, like when I went to college, you were not coming out with a vocation, you were not coming out with a job, you were coming out, that degree symbolized that you became knowledgeable and you were educated for the sake of education, and you took a wide variety of classes, and so that the liberal arts degree is more of a luxury for those who can indulge in the type of learning education versus, that environment, and versus a more career vocation focused higher education.
So I think I understand your question. You're saying, like, if you're not privileged, all you can get is a career focused education.
What I think we're that's what I feel in some ways where we are going, because we talk about that it's all about vocation, getting a job. We talk about STEM careers. You look at building programs that are for people for the workforce, right? Where most people would say, I joke, when most people would say that their child wants to major in philosophy or poetry, they would be like, well, what kind of job are you going to get? But now I joke, after the poet Gorman, from the inauguration, and now the people see all the things she's doing, so everybody's going to be like, go for the poetry.
Right.
But my point is, that's not for the work. I mean, you have to figure out how to apply that. Like, there's no competency-based idea of what kind of career. You could look at the skills of being a poet, or critical reasoning, and being able to construct an argument, and being able to evaluate things from different points of view, perspective, those things. But I don't necessarily think those are competencies. That's just more like knowledge.
See, I would argue they are competencies.
Okay.
People make the connection of competencies related to career, but that doesn't have to be that way. If every degree program, I don't care if it's liberal arts or not, you had to have met some standards of learning. You have to. You don't think so?
Well, I mean, think about it. I didn't have to take any standardized test to get my. I mean, my degree
what's your degree in?
My undergraduate degree is in child development.
So your argument would be that you don't know any more about child development than someone who either didn't earn a degree or earned a degree in something else. You don't know any more about it?
No. I mean, obviously, because I took specialized courses.
You have competencies.
Right. But what I'm saying is that at a true liberal arts college, it's not about teaching you for a job, or it's not.
Competencies, while they can be connected to jobs, they are not. It doesn't have to be. A competency is just competence. It's just take the word competency away.
Okay.
It's expertise.
Okay,
it's understanding.
All right. But you also talk about at WGU the idea of return on investment. Okay.
That's what WGU is for. Back to I want to answer your question, because your question is, do underprivileged only get access to this or that? Absolutely not, in my mind.
Okay.
It's what WGU is. We're not presenting that WGU is the only
because you're in these 4 areas. But I'm trying to say is, if down the road, would WGU, because you do have to take certain basic liberal arts to get a BA, right? It's a Bachelor of Arts. There are certain things you have to take in the arts, right? So they are taking those classes. But would you ever just offer like a BA in philosophy or literature? Or
I doubt it, but that doesn't mean, just because WGU doesn't offer that, doesn't mean that that shouldn't be offered by some
I agree.
institution in an affordable, flexible, competency-based way. You can demonstrate competency in philosophy. You can. I'm not a philosopher, so I don't, but you could say that someone who earns a degree in philosophy should know about these basic concepts of philosophical thinking. What, again, I don't,
No,
I took like one philosophy class, but logic, et cetera,
But nobody's doing that. I mean,
but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be.
Right. I'm not saying that either. So what I'm saying is right now, it just seems to me that where we steer people is if you have the luxury to sort of indulge in the time on a college, because you also said, like, it's the time, like, you don't have to wait till the end of the semester to take the final. But during that time, the instructor would give you supplemental reading, or there's other things you could do, or you could do research. I mean, it's not like you're just idling.
Do that. And if you want to do that and add time to completion because you're really curious, you can do that. So I want to be very, very clear that WG, nobody's steering anybody and saying, because you're underserved, you only can do this kind of degree program.
I don't think we're saying that it's only. I just feel like when you talk about workforce and vocation, it is a very different conversation than, return on investment was not necessarily the conversation when you're looking at going to a true liberal arts college.
No, it wasn't, and it hasn't been. But
I'm not saying. I'm saying that maybe it should be, but my fear is that all colleges are doing now is they're all getting rid of all of these, philosophy departments, women's studies departments, languages.
My father was a history professor. He's retired from Ball State. I grew up in his classes. You won't meet anybody who believes more in education for education's sake than me.
Okay.
I also am so practical, and for whatever reason now, our world is, if you survey, and they do, when you survey people about their reasons for going to post-secondary education, more than 90% of people say that they're doing it for career advancement.
Right. And you also have 73% of your undergraduates versus 42% of the national average find careers in their field of study. Like I studied child development and I was going to medical school, and now I'm a journalist. So but that's also,
but you're fine.
But you're also gearing that towards their they are more invested, that they are doing it for career opportunity.
Some of that is because of who chooses to go to school at WGU. Is that, like, they so often they're already working in a either in that field or in a parallel field, and so they're not going to make a big shift either. They are adults, and so they have a better concept because of life experience and like what they want to do. So if you're working with a group of 18 to 22 year olds, about 80% of them are going to say they want to go into business, which
they don't understand what business is, right?
So business, teaching, or some health profession, because that's
or whatever they see on TV.
That's what I mean. That's what they know.
Right.
That's what they know, and it's just a lack of knowing. And so then they get into their courses, and just like you did, you were like, I don't know if I want to be a doctor.
Right.
So then they change.
But I couldn't major in pre-med. I just took those as part of my.
Sure, but you still redirected, is my point. And so what I'm saying is that when you're working with a population of learners who are average age 38, work full time, they're a lot more likely to return to school understanding what it means to get a degree in IT or teaching. Like they're doing it. Our students who are earning their teaching degree often have worked as paraprofessionals, or they've volunteered in the classroom with their kids.
Or they're people who want to pivot. They've had a successful career and now they want to give back into the classroom.
But they know it's known. It's not like I'm going to be a teacher because that's the only thing I know of.
Right.
Whereas an 18 to 22 year old, that's more likely to be the case. So back to your point about the statistics, that most of our students work in a field where related to their degree, they're going into it kind of knowing what
they're a little bit more mature. I mean,
yeah.
So do you also think, though, that there's a difference, when people talk about street smarts versus book smarts, do you think that with competency-based, is it more like the applicable, like street smarts, or do you think that your programs give you both?
Our programs are structured completely around competencies. So if street smarts is a competency for a particular degree program, and that would be defined in a different way.
Well, I meant, yeah, it would be like really
so,
pragmatic, like accounting. There's certain principles of accounting and how
Yeah.
you do certain things.
So if it is something that's identified as needed by experts in that field, then then they would have to demonstrate competency in it.
So we really then, I think we have to really sort of also, I think, change the conversation a lot about what is higher education and how do we assess what, it's not just about getting a degree, but maybe that we have to look at it more, that we have to shift overall to a competency-based
You got me. That's
model.
what I want to do. I mean, I think that I truly believe that any degree program, be it liberal arts or be it more sort of
Right.
vocationally
Right.
related, like
Right.
any of them can be divided
Okay,
into
but do you think
competencies.
that would then take away some of the gravitas of a professor? Because, you know, they
so.
sort of, right, okay.
And I'm
Why?
married to a professor,
Okay.
and I'm the daughter of a professor.
Because they sort of feel like they know how to create a class and they know what you should get from it, but they couldn't necessarily pull out what are those, real tangible competencies.
Some could and some couldn't.
Right.
You know.
So it would be putting more of a little bit of a standard, because you also don't have your professors don't necessarily, they don't create the curriculum.
They don't create the
Do
curriculum.
they have input into it? Do they?
Yeah, and yes. So there's a collaborative atmosphere where, so if I'm a course instructor teaching accounting,
Right.
and there's something in the curriculum that is like not resonating with the learners,
Right.
maybe like, hey, over and over again, students have trouble with this concept the way it's presented,
Right.
or they have some expertise or some input that's like, this doesn't make
Right.
sense, or this doesn't line up.
Right.
They can work with our product development team and give feedback. So there's a loop there.
And do they have to teach, because you figured out what's the best method, if it's like you do a little bit of a lecture and then you stop and then you go do some pragmatic. So do you also teach your professors, in a sense, how to teach? Because they do have industry knowledge and expertise, but not necessarily all professors are great teachers. And also, if you know the best way to utilize technology and the online learning, because people even find that a lot of them, it's not that you just sit there and watch the lecture and then, and then you take your notes and whatever. So do you also help really get them to be able to work within this new teaching
Yes.
environment?
Yes, that's a whole part of the onboarding and training.
And it probably changes the type of people you look for.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, where if you go into higher ed wanting to teach like a sage on the stage, you don't want to work for WGU.
Plus, they don't get summers off.
No.
They don't get that nice month off break. I mean, these are now, they're working. And do you have some?
they're working 40 hours a week.
Because you also have your what did you call it? What's the mentor person that you?
Yes.
Okay.
We have program mentors.
And you said that a lot of people go at night and stuff. So are professors holding, like, instead of normal office hours, they're doing stuff at night at like 10 o'clock? So they have to.
Well, they not necessarily. But we do have both our program mentors and our course instructors do work as teams to cover evening hours. Nobody's expected to work overnight. Do some do it on their own, for sure.
Right.
But we talk about setting boundaries. Like, if you respond to a midnight meeting, they're going to think you'll do that all the time. That's not an expectation. But we do make sure
within 24 hours getting a response.
And the other thing, though, is, remember, we're nationwide. So we might have a course instructor working in California with someone who lives and works in, New York.
That's right.
And
you don't think about that's 3 hours.
And so that works in our favor,
let's
too.
just pivot a little bit to touch on, I was saying to you that I thought that, you guys must have done phenomenal with COVID, especially with people being stuck at home, and then also with the dollars that you can get to go back and, in certain careers, and IT is one of them, getting those scholarships and dollars. And also, so how have you seen the university's impact or be impacted by COVID, and also the issue with women?
Yeah. So the pandemic, for one thing, being unprecedented in our generation, it's been a little bit volatile and unpredictable, right? So initially when people went home, I started to tell the story about our student who was the IT professional and went back. He sped through his degree program because he could. He had the flexibility to do so.
He also didn't think we would be under lockdown for
a year. Yeah,
right.
nobody really did. Well,
Right.
Lay people didn't. So he wasn't alone. We had a lot of people who saw that initial teachers. We saw teachers who were suddenly teaching from home, and they, K-12 teachers, and so they took that as an opportunity to go on and get their master's degree.
Right.
And so we saw a little bump that way. Health professions has been up and down,
right,
depending on the,
although the interest in health professions has significantly increased because of what people see the need
for sure
in terms of healthcare and better health insurance and
so
access.
Our trend for health professions applications has been up. It's just that there will be months that it just goes down because they're, if they're working in the field already,
they may be burnout or
yeah. So we've seen that kind of a little bit of volatility kind of all over the place because people just don't know. We did see people sort of wait until after the election, which is not uncommon, to make a move, just kind of like, what's going to happen in this world before I make any big long-term commitments? Like
and that's a lot of times when people sort of see what's happening with the economy and the election, because a lot of times that's what you joke, you say, go to graduate school, go back to school, stay in school.
Yeah.
That's
So there's been some of that sort of up and down. So some of the things that we've done to respond to support students for our students who were enrolled in the pandemic, we were already flexible. We weren't built for a pandemic, but because we're so student-centered, we didn't have to change a lot to support our students. But
you also did a lot with funding.
Yes, I'll get to that. But we did do things like extend deadlines for incompletes and things like that. We were able to really we always just put students first, and so we just continued to do that and found ways to do it that made sense. We did for our continuing students, we did have a resiliency grant that we offered for people who were had hardships because of COVID. And so they got funding from an emergency fund that was set up last year. And then we saw such success with that, we created our resiliency grants that are ongoing through, I believe we have them ongoing through the end of July. But I'm not positive about that because they extended it.
Right. But you've also given last year in 2020, it was like $1 million. And
nearly. We've always been generous with our scholarships, but the resiliency grant is a direct response to COVID, and so we've been giving out resiliency grants, and then we also have online access scholarships that we give out. So for folks who don't have access to high-speed
you realize that everybody realized with this whole online that there were these
there's a real divide.
These divide of broadband access and access to digital.
Yes. So we're giving out scholarships that give people access to the high-speed internet. So that you asked about women, the impact on the economic impact has been disproportionate in terms of impact on women.
And more women have had their jobs impacted, or they were frontline workers, or they were the ones who had to step us out.
Stay at home with their
right.
kids.
They had a sideline, which would be those that you were talking about that had to take a break,
and particularly women of color. There's a disproportionate impact, and so. I guess in terms of what are we doing, we've always had a majority of our students are women. I think that I feel a personal responsibility that we do things like have this conversation. We work to make sure that people know that we're here and what a wonderful resource we are for some, because if I'm a woman who is just not even making ends meet, and I've lost my job, and I've got kids at home, and I'm trying to help homeschool.
The last thing they're going to think about is going back to school.
Which right now may not be the time for them, but when the kids go back to school, and maybe the job that they had no longer works for them, that they understand that because we are so affordable, because we have so much, you can use your Pell grants and all your state and federal financial aid, and because we offer so many scholarships.
Right, because people, one of the things that I always say, that people think that when there's an economic concern about going to college, they think that they'll get more financial aid and stuff from state schools. But in a lot of cases, it's private schools, which is like you are. They have more scholarships and financial aid because they want a diversity of base, or they have more programs, and they have in some ways less students because more students apply to a traditional state. So there are a lot of opportunities.
There are a lot of, it's a lot of financial support. The other thing that is important is that students use less, our graduates have less much less loan debt than other grads, and that's partly because you can get through more quickly, partly because it doesn't cost as much, and partly because we just had a responsible borrowing initiative that reduced the amount of loans taken out by educating our students in like how much money, just because you qualify for a $5,000 loan
doesn't mean you need to take
how
it.
much do you need, and we reduced our debt, our student debt overall by 40%.
Well, and your average degree, undergraduate degree, is $17,000. So you figure
compared
if you
to
get
90,000 national average.
So it's and you know, I think that also. What do you think going forward? I mean, I know that, like I was telling you, I know that WGU has lots of initiatives that they're looking for, you know, forward, and you're constantly trying to figure out what is going to be in demand sort of in the workforce, and you're constantly retooling some of your programs or creating new programs. So what do you see for the remainder of like the 21st century? Where is WGU, and what kinds of programs or things do you think we're going to see?
So a couple of new programs that I would want to highlight, we just launched a family nurse practitioner program here in Indiana that was in high demand. Lots of our nursing graduate students wanted, our graduates of our nursing programs were asking for that. So family nurse practitioner. We also last year launched a health services coordination health services coordination bachelor's degree. So that's truly just to meet that need of healthcare is complicated. They help coordinate the services. So those are a couple of degrees that we launched recently. There's also a master's in learning and technology. So people who are in K-12 and want to learn how to use technology, teach online and do it right. They can get that through our degree programs. I think what's coming next are our stackable credentials that we talked about. Degrees redesigned into stackable credentials. I think a lot of postgraduate certificates,
I think
professional, ongoing professional development. You'll see that. You'll see
I
us
think that's going to be
partnering
huge
more.
because I mean, I find it, you know, that, and like even just a simple thing is I want to learn graphic design, okay, because now they, or here's another one, editing, video editing, because now they expect a journalist not only to find the story, write the story, you know, videotape the story, post the story. So, but you can't just I can't get a class that's just video editing where I feel also that it's not just somebody I don't know who's teaching, you know, like I can't just watch, I don't want to just watch YouTube videos, because I also needed someone to teach it to me in the progression of how I need to learn.
And then give you feedback, and
and that, so it's, I think that's
that.
I think that the opportunity for really workforce higher education for people who already have master's degrees, and because we're living longer and we're in the workforce longer, and the average person now will have 7 careers in their lifetime. So if I now decided at this point, because my industry is in trouble, that, I really would like to teach. Right now, yes, I could go teach journalism. No high schools are offering journalism. But if I really wanted to go teach in the elementary school, there's, even though I don't necessarily feel like I need to take courses in rhetoric of education, I have to have that degree. So I don't want something that's going to take me 2 years. Because then I'm out of the workforce for those 2 years. So I definitely think reevaluating that, and also for because we're living longer, and you know, I think that that's you know, I joke sometimes I wish I could go back now and get another bachelor's degree. You know, and sort of. I
know a good place you can do that.
Oh yeah, okay. So obviously, I think what you're doing, I mean, I think that probably, I would say the biggest challenge for you, WGU and WGU Indiana, is really getting the word out, and really how to separate you from sort of the, you know, rise to the top. Because I don't think people really understand the difference of the type of program, and like you said, a lot of people think online learning, and you know, like now they have all those MOOCs where they're open, you know, learning, and you can't, and but the fact that you really are, you know, thinking about this, and then with the overlaying that with the financial ability, and then I think that that to me at this point would be, I don't know if I'm right or wrong.
That's what keeps me up at night. Because I meet current students and alumni all the time who say, WGU is the only way I ever would have been able to get this degree because of affordability and access,
and I just don't think that people know about it.
People not knowing about it, or knowing about it and making the wrong assumptions.
Well, maybe you have to also do like I would love to do a trial class. Like I would love it if you could do because I would like to see this in action and understand the competencies. So I think maybe you could do, like, if you had a demo class that somebody could take, like maybe it's, like
there might be something out there actually.
Like it's like a try before you buy. Because also to see, like I was telling you, that some online learning, it's not good for me. I love the stage on the stage, then I go off and I read and then I can, but I think maybe trying a class so that, or like an intro. And then I could see, because I would really be that. I'm really curious.
So let me. What we do have is that when you are admitted to WGU, your first activity is an online. It's like an orientation.
Right.
It's and there is no commitment. You can leave with no cost except for the time that you put in.
So you can take a class.
I mean, it's an orientation class, but it gives you that. It gives you that demo.
But I really would want to take.
Well,
a
I
class.
mean, like a part of it is interacting with the way that you learn.
And you really worked on that to make sure that you had the retention of students, and you really worked very much on your onboarding of your students.
Yeah, because we don't want to admit people that won't complete.
And that was the problem with a lot of these for-profit schools, which
that's right.
Okay.
That's
so.
important.
Well, I do hope you'll come back so that we can continue this conversation. I think we didn't even, like I said, I don't even touch half of it.
Yeah.
I think really looking at, and I'm really curious now to look at how your competencies for some of your liberal arts type of classes. So I'm going to hold you to looking at those.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask the guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game. And he believed that by answering these questions, we're going to get even more about your true nature, besides your passion in higher education.
Yeah.
What is your favorite word?
I'm just going to tell you, I hate picking favorites because I have about 10. But what comes to my mind right now is abiding.
Abiding.
The meaning of, kind of going with the flow.
Okay. What is your least favorite word?
Hate.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
New innovation.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Limitations.
What sound or noise do you love?
My children laughing.
What sound or noise do you hate?
My children crying.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Maybe teaching.
What profession would you not like to do?
Accounting.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
Being a mother.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
I'd like to talk to my grandparents again.
How would you like to die?
Peacefully.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well done.
Well done to you. And you can learn more about And Good Company and all the other great conversations we have had at andgoodcompany.info. We look forward to next week when we again invite you to enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.